Good morning, everyone. I'm Shahjahan Nawaz. I see a lot of familiar faces, but a lot of new faces too. But just to give you a little background, I used to be director of the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council. In fact, I founded the South Asia Center in 2009 in January, so we're approaching the 11th anniversary of the center. And I stepped aside a few years ago, and today it's my honor to welcome all of you and our guests to the council. On behalf of Irfan Nuruddin, the director. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today, so I was called in to sit in for him and hopefully learn along with you from our guests. We're looking at a very important topic today, scaling quality public education in Pakistan. What will it take? An issue which not just Pakistan, but countries around the world are trying to tackle, whether it's by capturing, quantifying results and outcomes, or the quality of education or training. And let me first introduce our guests briefly. On my right is Nadia Naviwala. She's a non-resident fellow at the Wilson Center. She's a long-time Washington hand, and so knows this city very well. Then Riaz Ahmed Kamlani, who is the Executive Vice President Outcomes of the Citizens Foundation. I'm sure that most of you know what the TCF is. For me, it's probably one of the best examples of a voluntary organization that identified an issue and decided it would do something about it. And my family and I are very proud to have been partners of TCF over the years. And just earlier this week, we had a fundraiser where we set a new record for fundraising in a single night. We got almost $2.5 million raised in one night. The last few years, that's been the trend. It's been above $2 million a night, which means that the diaspora is learning to give back to the homeland. And it's all because of what TCF does, which is to create a healthy opportunity for children in Pakistan to learn, and to create special opportunities for the girl child, because as people like Atif Mia, the famous Pakistani economist, reminds us, if you bring your women into the education field and then into the workspace, a country like Pakistan can increase its GDP by 22%, simply by having women participate as fully as they could. So a lot to be done there, and this is where the outcomes come in. Next to Mr. Riaz Ahmed Kamlani is Zia Akhtar Abbas, who is the Executive Vice President Partnerships of the Citizens Foundation, and then Arub Iqbal, who used to be with Teach for Pakistan after she'd finished her undergraduate studies, before she came here for her master's program. She's currently with the World Bank as a consultant working on education for the World Bank. She works on global issues as well as in Central Asia, among other places. So hopefully we will get a good roundup of their experiences. So I'm going to ask each of them to speak briefly, leaving enough room for us to have a conversation so that we can learn from each other. So Nadia, would you like to go first?
Sure.
Thank you.
And I'll say real quick, this is not about girls' education. It's not what I'll talk about. But there is a huge demand for girls' schooling in Pakistan. I think this problem has really changed in the past 20 years. Urban Pakistan is actually at gender parity. So that's some good, surprising news. But that masks a problem where overall large numbers of children are dropping out. So gender parity in Pakistan is where girls are dropping out of middle school, but boys are also dropping out. And so the system might look like a few percentage points of each make it to university. So that's evenly bad for both. What I'm going to do, I was told I have 5 minutes. And so what I'll do is in 5 minutes take us to a Pakistani school just to center the problem where it should be centered, which is on the child and on the classroom. And then I will trust that Riaz and Zia and Arub will actually, this is where their work is centered, and will address some of the problems that I'm raising. So it's a trusty Google Photos album. I have 20 seconds for each slide in 5 minutes. So this is a school on the outskirts of...
It's a flexible 5 minutes. So.
Oh, it is?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we'll take it by popular demand, maybe to 7 minutes. But this is a Pakistani school. It's on the outskirts of Peshawar. It's what's called a multi-grade school. The majority of schools in Pakistan roughly look like this in that they are multi-grade. And I know there are a couple of people in the room who know education very well. For others, this is a way that I think we need to center the narrative in Pakistan. This school has 2 classrooms, 120 children. 60 of them are in one classroom, and this is Kachi. Kachi is roughly the equivalent of kindergarten. The numbers in this classroom, you can see the classroom is packed, reflect a pattern in Pakistan where approximately 85% of kids will enroll in Kachi. And this is what someone from DFID told me was a huge Pakistan success in developed country levels of enrollment. So you have these kids coming to school out of a desire to come to school. But this is what grade 1 looks like. It's about 16 students outside. This is grade 2, it's about 9. And this is grades 3, 4, and 5 being taught at once in the second classroom in the school. There are 2 teachers in this school. Grade 3 is on your right, it's the cluster. Grade 4 is in front, and grade 5 are the 2 students in the back. The problem is, 1, there are supposed to be on paper twice as many kids in this class between grade 3, 4, and 5. They're not there in reality. So our numbers, when we say 65% of kids make it to grade 5, in reality, those kids are actually not in school. So there's an issue with the statistics there. The problem is that out of 120 kids in the school, only 1 can read. He's the boy in the back. And by the way, this is a girls' school, but there are boys in it. And pretty much every school in Pakistan, when you see that they're girls or boys, will have the opposite gender in them. So the boys' schools will have girls, a girls' school will have boys, and this is a reflection of the demand for education. So this boy is the only one who can read. This is consistent with the statistics in Pakistan, where the education debate at a technical level is centered, and where I think at a popular level we need to kind of realize is that for so long we've tried to enroll kids in school, assuming that a school is something resembles what we think of as a school. But actually these are buildings. There's an adult present, maybe. That's an achievement that now we have managed to force teachers to show up. But if you gave, so the more popular statistic is that about 45% of kids in Pakistan can read a sentence. This doesn't factor in comprehension. So this is a more rigorous test that was done that factors in comprehension. What they found is that if you give a child a 60-word passage, they can read 25 words. But they don't understand any of it. You ask them 5 questions about that passage, they can't even answer 1. And it's estimated, and this is an estimate, that only around 4 to 12% of 3rd graders, so now we're talking about the children in school, 3rd graders in Pakistan would both be considered fluent readers relative to other children in the province and understand 80% of what they're reading. So we not only have a huge crisis of reading, but even the people looking at reading are not thinking about comprehension. So this is what it looks like when a child reads. This is a child who speaks Pashto, and she's reading an Urdu textbook. And volume. So she's reading, is there a way to get volume? So she's reading fluently. You don't need all this. So she appears to be reading. She's stumbling a lot. Can you read this? No, I can't. Try it, just the first word. Okay. No. So I went to 100 classrooms across Pakistan and asked did something similar. Sat down with the kids, asked a lot of kids if they could read, and going to a page in their textbook that they hadn't seen before. And often this was the type of reaction or the type of response. And when I asked teachers, how would you help this child? Well, they would say, well, we haven't done this yet. And I was like, what would you do? And he was like, well, what we do is that I will read something to the class will repeat. I'll read it again, the class will repeat. And eventually, he didn't say this explicitly, but what I saw happening is the kids memorize the words on their page. So that's how they appear to be reading. They can memorize, they can replicate, but without comprehension. I need a translation to talk to these kids because they were Pashto speaking. So if you look at Urdu, these kids are learning to read and write Urdu in English when they start school in Kutchi. Kutchi has a loose idea that children will learn letters and numbers, but they're learning letters of Urdu and English. Urdu, you can see the highest rates of Urdu as mother tongue are Sindh and urban Sindh, Karachi. But you go to even Punjab, it's 5% according to the Bureau of Statistics, not a clear picture according to the stats. 2%, 1%. So we even overestimate the extent to which Urdu is understood and spoken, and especially as a mother tongue for a small child in Pakistan. In Kutchi, the way that kids are learning in Kutchi, so this is there's one problem of language, the second problem of the way that instruction is happening is there's not a phonetic method. Imagine, if we tried to learn English without phonics. Now imagine if you disappeared all the vowels. That's kind of what Urdu looks like for children who don't speak Urdu. So these kids are learning, and I kind of learned many songs in this process, but they're learning alif madda se aru, alif madda se aru, alif madda se aru, and alif madda is a letter, se aru is peach. So they're saying this over and over and over again, but when I ask the child, what is this letter? All she says is alif madda se aru. She has no idea that this letter is making the sound of this word. And the guy in the background says, well, grade 1 can do this. Call a kid from grade 1. Grade 1 can, this is a higher level. But what happens in grade 1, and by the way, there are other songs, if the English version of this is A-double-P-L-E, apple, apple mano seeb, A-double-P-L-E, apple, apple mano seeb. I mean, imagine if your entire education felt like this. And they're not learning a, pa, and then the E silent. That's what they're doing. So they don't learn how to read. In grade 1, they're given full text, full books, and go through this process of repetition and memorization, but now they're doing it in 4 languages. So these are their textbooks in English, Urdu, Pashto, and the book that ministers and curriculum officials told me does not exist in primary school, Arabic. And all of these languages have different scripts. So now you have children who cannot read, who are not taught to read and write the language they understand, and they're given books in multiple languages and scripts and told to memorize all of them. If any of you, like me, learned to read the Quran in Arabic without comprehension, this is what the entire education system is mimicking and essentially doing. English is one of my biggest debates in Pakistan with Pakistanis. Systems are moving towards English medium, meaning this is a misnomer, that the textbooks will be in English. Teachers do not speak English, children do not speak English. It's as if your education from the day you started school, your textbooks were in Turkish, and yet your teachers didn't speak Turkish, you never heard Turkish, and you were taught this is a language you will learn to read and write, and that all of your science and math textbooks will be in. This isn't a good government school in the center of Peshawar, at least infrastructurally. And this kid is reading, it's 2nd grade, and he's reading Abu or Chachi Bachon ko Park Le Gaye. And you can see how he stumbles over and over again. Every child did this, especially on the word park. So he struggles with this, and the problem of language. I'm assuming some of you speak Urdu, but I'll translate. So I ask him, what is your name? What do you speak? I speak Pashto. Look at his eyes and his face. And I'm speaking to him in Urdu. He's like, I understand Pashto a little bit. What's the nicest thing about Peshawar?
आपको क्या पसंद है जहाँ पे आप रहते हो
वहाँ मुझे रोड है सब
रोड है क्या चीज़ पसंद है आप क्या करते
Look at his face and his eyes. He's like, oh, there's a road. It's tongue-tied.
हो okay
मैं पढ़ाई करता
What do you do after school? I study.
खेलते हो
Do you play?
हूँ थोड़ा
A little.
बस थोड़े से
What do you play? Well, just a few people.
थोड़े से लोग खेलते हैं क्या खेलते
A few people play. What do you play?
हैं मुश्किल है पश्तो में बताओ
Tell me in Pashto.
पश्तो में बताओ
पश्तो में
Pashto, yeah.
क्या करते हो समझाओ क्या करते हो स्कूल के बाद
What do you do after school?
पश्तो में
स्कूल ना पास में जाए लोग पटपटवाने लोग
He has so much expression. And this is what we are like just cutting children off from. That they are told from the moment they step into school that if they can't write it in English or Urdu, it's not worthy of even being written in their notebooks. And yet, imagine, I think we all know children and how much they have to say and how much to think. And this is where conceptual understanding, creativity, confidence, communication, all the things that we now refer to as 21st century skills, this is where they start. And unless Pakistan understands this, and in powerful rooms in Washington, I think that's a start. This won't happen. Now there's kind of a buzzword around early childhood education, and this is what's happening in some schools, these kind of colorful walls and tables. But that video I just showed you is in the same school. Functionally, nothing is actually changing. This kid is speaking English and Sindhi. If at first you don't say, so what he's done is that he's written, so later on in education, what happens is that the kids have English books, they've written the Sindhi translation, and then they learn to memorize both in rapid. And that's what he was doing. He was saying English, Sindhi, English, Sindhi, English, Sindhi, all run together. In university, this ends up being large-scale plagiarism. So kids are expected to read and write, to produce papers in English. They don't speak English. They copy-paste text from think tanks in Washington. So I taught in a master's IR program. That's exactly what happened. And the kids say, well, we don't speak English. So what else do you expect? This is kind of a North Star. This is one school at TCF where they're experimenting with play-based education. What they've done, TCF has 1,500 schools. They've taken one school and said, can we do this to the international standard? So they have cut textbook time in half. They've redesigned the space, so you can see they moved out the furniture because they saw that kids and teachers were actually comfortable sitting on the floor, more space for play. But one big thing that they're doing is writing storybooks. And storybooks are really important for getting kids to want to read and developing early language skills, all the reasons why in the US parents read to children, right? But in Pakistan, storybooks are not available that are fun, creative, big picture in Urdu, and definitely not in local languages. So at TCF, they've written 100 storybooks because they couldn't find them in the market. And the day starts with story time. And this is just the play-based piece, one of my favorite things. All the boys pulled out the kitchen set of all the choices, and they never left the kitchen set for the entire period of that time. So I'll leave it there. I don't know how well I did on the 5 minutes, but I think that sets up the problem of multi-grade, of language, of literacy, and at least defining the problem correctly, which is what I think we've gotten so wrong and needs to be right if we're going to have a chance at cracking a fraction of this. So, thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. I'm going to turn quickly to Riaz Ahmed Kamlani to hear about TCF's experience with outcomes.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for inviting us over. I think Nadia set up very well in terms of what the issues are. I would perhaps touch upon the TCF experience, and in context of that, what do we believe is a broad direction for how this should be done, where the solutions lie. And the starting point for me on that is our experience over 20-25 years is startlingly clear on one conclusion. Education in Pakistan is no more a demand-side issue. It's a supply-side issue. Parents, no matter where in Pakistan, whether poor or rich, whether parents of boys or girls want to send their children to schools. The issue is with this supply side, and the supply side issues is a two-dimensional issue. First is the actual physical supply of schools. Secondly, the supply must be of sufficient quality to be deemed worthwhile, to be worth their while to send the kids to school. And I'll touch on both those, that if we have this particular context, which Nadia has laid down very well, what can be done on the supply side on both, but particularly on the quality part. But just firstly to give a glimpse on what supply in terms of excess means. TCF's experience over this, let's say, 20-25 year period, starting from 5 schools are now going to 1,567 in some of the poorest neighborhoods in the country, reflect a few things. Firstly, the fact that schools must be close to where children live. They should ideally be able to walk to schools. And that's particularly crucial for the girl child. That to be able to walk to schools means that the deterrent for education and sustained education are reduced. Number 2, it should be an environment that is safe. That does not mean that it has to be an expensive school building all the time, but the school building has to be reasonable. It must have a boundary wall, it must have toilets, it must have potable water, it must have decent sized classrooms for kids to study in. And one of the key factors that's been part of TCF's success is female faculty. That has really prompted parents to send their girls to schools. So creating that kind of safe environment. And the last attribute I would say in terms of that access is a very well-entrenched community involvement. This should be seen as a part of the community rather than something that's kind of implanted within. And how do you take parents along, how do you take the larger community along is crucial to success. So that's on the supply side when it comes to access, and there are significant issues, but the access part of those issues are, in terms of literature as well, reasonably well understood. There's been a lot of narrative, if I go across the last decade, maybe 15 years, around missing boundary walls, missing facilities, school mapping not being there, ghost teachers, ghost students, and a lot of work, particularly around technology, to try to sort that out. And there have been some reasonable strides made on that. But the conversation that's conspicuous by absence, and it's now coming through over the last 12, 18 months, is one of quality. And there, our experience suggests that quality is essentially, if you imagine with me, a 5-point spectrum. You need to get 5 things with an overarching variable on that right, and if you get those right, then that gives you the right underpinning for quality. The first of those 5 is a medium of instruction. Children must understand. I'm not sure how many of you are Urdu speakers here, but I can very easily swing into Urdu, and I'm sure I'll lose half my audience because I'll be talking of an alien concept and alien language. That's exactly what happens to a child when you have English medium schools. When the child is listening to something, whether it's science or maths in English, the child just doesn't get it. So English medium has been kind of taken as the ideal. Punjab government has gone that route, KP government has gone that route, and it makes absolutely no sense. What research unequivocally says, that's in a child's best interest to receive early education, particularly in mother tongue, and if not possible in mother tongue, then at least a language of common use. TCF is Urdu medium, and proudly so. We have not been able to do mother tongue simply because if you look at our overall landscape, we're dealing with a couple of dozen languages. We haven't had the resources to put up the books, the teacher training program around that. But research would confirm the fact that if it's not possible to do in mother tongue, then Urdu would be a second best option and something that would serve the child well. And in that endeavor, mother tongue should not be undermined at a school level, which it is not. We're now doing work to actually bring mother tongue in. We're doing work in the Thar Desert, and just as a side anecdote, when we went into the Thar Desert to say, what can be done as far as mother tongue instruction is concerned, we were thinking of what is essentially known as the 3-language formula, which is Sindhi, Urdu, and English. When we went there, and what we saw was that it's a 4-language structure or maybe a 5-language one, because the local languages are Dhatki, Marwari, Kachhi. Sindhi actually comes after that. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on a structure of a language policy, but before that very clear recognition that English medium does not mean quality. You do not need to teach science and maths in English for that to be understood. What you must do is teach that in the right language, and if you want to do English, yes, by all means do English, but English as a language, the subject which should be taken along, so that child, by the time, let's say when you get to grade 6, 7 or 8, there is a transition which is possible. So the first key piece of the 5 is get your language ladder right, which may have starting off with Sindhi or Pashto, transition onto Urdu, and then to English. What that results in the classroom are the kind of things that Nadia has just shown, and I think that's something to protect our children from. Once you have the language right, the second conversation is around what is being taught, the textbooks. There's a lot of discussion around curriculum, and we've looked at the national curriculum of Pakistan, which is 2006-7, and don't find anything earth-shatteringly wrong there in terms of the student learning outcomes that's stacked up at various grade levels. There isn't anything hugely problematic. Where the problem comes is when those curriculum year-end targets are translated into textbooks on how those are treated. Mother tongue instruction is one, but let's look at what practically happens in that kind of multi-grade classroom that you have. Do we have any teachers here who have been teachers at any part of their lives? Lesson planning rings a bell? It's the joy or the bane of most teachers' lives, but it's essential. You can't go into a class without a lesson plan. Now imagine this class, 2 kids of grade 5, 7 of grade 4, 11 of grade 3. Imagine you're the teacher for 40 minutes. How will you swing it? Imagine even if there is only one grade, only one group of children, how will you in a low resource setting get lesson planning done? So what our experience suggests is get your textbooks right. Whatever you want to do, whether it's experiential learning or conceptual building, whatever you want to do, instill that as part of the textbook so that there aren't any add-ons that the teacher needs to go to. Augment that with very detailed teacher guides which are down to a lesson plan level, so that the teacher in year 1 can teach from those, be comfortable, and then by year 2 or 3 being able to say, I want to amend this, I want to do my own way. Sure, but that's an evolution that comes along. So, and then lastly, augment that with the right kind of workbooks, flashcards, teaching materials, so that you have a whole pack, a textbook which is well-defined, well thought through with English terminologies for science and maths where needed. Combine that with detailed teacher guides and combine that with flashcards, workbooks, whatever other teaching material needs to happen. A quick example which may illustrate that, when we at TCF have done our own maths books, we have thought, we'll do it in Urdu with English terminologies. Our kitab is called Meri Riyazi, My Mathematics Book. We've taken what's the approach that's being followed in Canada in terms of structuring the book, which brings experience first, followed by pictures and followed by symbols. So, and there we've inserted experiential learning. So for example, what would a classroom look like if there's a classroom which is on measurements, on centimeters and inches? The classroom chapter will be structured along first 10 minutes taking the concept, then the teacher will carry a measuring tape as a prop. The workbook will have that activity where the children will measure their chair, will stand up on the table, measure windows, measure themselves. So it's an active 15-20 minute animated classroom, and I've sat in many of those in the last row, and watch kids animatedly engaging with all of that and really conceptually understanding what measurement means. So in a low resource setting, with a teacher from the community, if you have this frame right, it's possible. It's possible to achieve those kind of classrooms, and eventually that's all that matters. What kind of classrooms are you able to achieve? So that's the second bit, getting your syllabus right. The third is around teacher training. Teacher training has 2 components, what to teach and how to teach. Content knowledge at a conceptual level, unfortunately, cannot be taken as a proxy indicator, cannot be taken as an assurance that because somebody has a BA or a BSc degree, that he or she would know what grade 5 science means conceptually. It pains one to say that, but that is the reality. So structuring, but at TCF, what we have done is we've made teacher content, conceptual content knowledge as a key variable of their success. So that's where recognition as well as reward is tied in, and pedagogy then comes through classroom observations. So when one looks at teachers, to look at both those dimensions, what is her content expertise and how well can she teach? These are things that are conspicuous by their absence in the public sector. And are these things that can be achieved? Absolutely. So content can be achieved through a teacher licensing process, of which nothing exists right now. But pedagogy, in terms of how a teacher teaches in school, for that we believe the fourth variable is absolutely crucial to this whole piece, which is school leadership. A good school for us is a good principal equals a good school. That's the kind of rule of thumb we've looked at for over 20 years, and it's a rule of thumb that's proven itself correct over and over again, and there's lots of literature which augments that. For most government schools, having a head teacher would be an exception. A large number of government schools will have 2 teachers or 3 teachers, and one of them will have an added charge of being a head teacher, which basically means signing off petty cash, nothing more. We believe having a head teacher is absolutely crucial, because academically she's the one or he's the one who would lead, would ensure that pedagogically what needs to happen is happening in classrooms, that lesson plans are actually being implemented, that copy checking is being done the right way, that assessments, feedback is being looped back to the child. So for a good system, the fourth strong, absolutely crucial variable will be having the right kind of school leadership. The fifth and the last thing is evaluation, particularly examinations. Any of you who coming from Pakistan who have done their metric, grade 9 and 10 here? I'm another one of those. So I did mine back in 1992, 93. And things haven't changed. You still can go across, have a selective course to study, looking at the large 5 years papers, because Allama Iqbal came the year before and Ghalib came the year after, therefore Iqbal will come this year. You can memorize a passage on Iqbal and replicate that, and it works, and you get the grades that you want. So if there are assessments which are testing rote memorization of a very selected stream, that's what you're going to get. So if education is to be reformed, those terminal examinations which really matter need to be changed. And if you start examining something that you really want to be assessed, then classroom teaching will get affected. And that's our experience at TCF as well. We make our midterm and final examinations at our head office on Bloom's taxonomy to understand what levels do we need to assess. And when you do that, you affect classroom teaching, because teachers know this is what's going to be tested. So really, in terms of our experience and answer around that, we think 5 variables: get the medium instruction right, get the textbook and associated materials designed right, get the teacher training, both content and how the teacher is teaching right, put school leadership in. Schools cannot succeed without that, and put an examination system that actually assesses all of this. The overarching variable in all of for this to succeed is governance. You have to have the governance incentives in place, and that's where public sector can get more complicated, but I'm sure my friend here will talk more about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Riaz. I'll ask Zia Akhtar Abbas to pick up, and before we get to Arub, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Thank you, Shuja. Morning, everyone. I think, Riaz and I working at TCF, really the last 24 years, TCF basically is a citizenship project. And we define our mission in terms of creating agents of positive change, but that's a much higher aspiration, and first they need to be able to read and write. If you ask me, the last 24 years in TCF have been about figuring out what learning, well, first of all, whether learning at scale is possible. Can you create a large-scale system in Pakistan at a cost which is affordable, at a quality which is desirable, at a scale which is in line with the kind of country we're talking about? And B, if that is possible, what does it look like? And what Riaz was just describing is the 5-pronged sort of approach, governance sort of overarching an umbrella over it. That's what learning at scale looks like. When we crossed the big, hairy, audacious goal of having established 1,000 of our own school units, we were gripped with the question, what now? And how do we magnify this impact? And really, the next big question is, how do we take this model of learning at scale and impact this massive population of school-going children who are either in failing schools or simply out of school? So there are 2 questions of access and quality. Those are inextricably linked. Parents and teachers and kids may say they don't want to go to school, but the school that they're saying they don't want to go to are the kinds of school Nadia just showed us. So what are the interventions that people in general, citizens in general, and citizens organizations like TCF what can we do to impact the system? That's what we wonder when we look at the state of affairs. And what TCF has done is really, in the entire spectrum of interventions, we are gripped with the challenge of ideating, testing, and rolling out large-scale experiments to see what is possible. The kind of model Riaz just described. Now imagine a public sector scenario, weak, if any, governance at all, teachers where incentives are misaligned, books which are fundamental issues with them. So there is a lot missing there. And what is the minimum viable model, so to speak, which will work in the reality of a public sector education system? So on one side, there is the notion of a public sector school, which simply ceases to operate like a public sector school and is now operated by an organization or a management team or a governance framework which is outside the constraints of the public sector. And so that's model A, so to speak. And in that sense, we have taken over about 310 government schools all over Pakistan, where for the vast majority, the teachers, the principals are employed by TCF. Some of them may have our books, but most of them don't have TCF books. But still, the governance, the way, the operating rhythm of the school is governed by us. And we've seen remarkable results. Within months, we saw enrollment going from an average of 42 children per school to 120 children plus per school now. In terms of learning outcomes, literacy and numeracy scores doubled or tripled within the space of 18 months because we did accelerated remedial actions on learning. So we are clear now that both in terms of being able to take over a large number of schools, being able to get kids in, and being able to affect their learning outcomes, this is very much possible if management itself changes. But that's a high-touch model. Let's take the other end of the spectrum, which is, let's call it model Z, which is where you don't take over any schools, we don't even intervene in schools. We actually take the 5 pillars that Riaz described and take them to decision makers and start talking to them about what a functioning school looks like, how learning at scale can be achieved. And in the last 12 to 18 months, TCF has had remarkable sort of success, or at least made significant headway in that direction. We are working with the government of KP on things like school leadership. We're working with the government of Sindh on developing quality books. We're working with the government of Punjab on multiple factors, including Riaz being now the chair of the Punjab Examinations Commission, which used to take the high-stakes grade 5 and grade 8 examinations of dubious value, really, to the system. And we're really proposing fundamental reform to that system. So on the other end of the spectrum really is citizens getting involved in policy and trying to impact how large-scale decisions are taken. In the middle of this spectrum, there are multiple interventions, and all our, last week or so in the US, we've been talking to organizations like Room to Read, learning about what Educate Girls is doing in this world, trying to understand what is the minimum viable model, or what do those options look like where we could intervene and turn existing public schools with existing governance and existing teachers to better outcomes. Maybe they won't go from 2 to 10, but can we get them to 5 or 6? And that process is a cerebral one and about learning in action as well. So it requires multiple stakeholders to get involved. All of you who are interested in education in Pakistan, we need combined brain power and combined commitment to fuel this process. This is not just a TCF-led effort. It really is something that we all need to own and find what's the shortest distance between where we are and a functioning public education system. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you get the highest marks in terms of brevity. Let's ask Arub to give us some of her experience coming, as she does, from being a practitioner in Pakistan to now being at the World Bank.
Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot, Nadia, to give us the context of Pakistan. So, and it was very good to see the pictures too, because those reminded me of my own days with Teach for Pakistan. My school used to be much better than the school that you showed pictures of, but it was also in Karachi, and in Sultanabad, and between two very posh areas of Karachi. So I would talk a little about my experience too, but it was very good to hear from everyone too. And so as we see, Pakistan has two major issues, that there is still 22 million children who are out of school, and even for the students who are in school, the learning outcomes are very low, as Nadia put in very well. And it was very good to hear from TCF experience too, how they have been able to work in the education sector and now partnering with government, with the public education sector, so that the public education sector can take on those lessons. I would like to add one more component into the 5-pronged strategy and try to emphasize the importance of teachers. I worked as a Teach for Pakistan fellow for 2 years in a public school in Karachi, and I think that teachers are the most important component of an education system. An education policy can be very well written, but teachers in a school are the people who would deliver. And if teachers lack the content knowledge, they would not be able to deliver. So we have to hire best talent for the education sector. Secondly, we have to coach and mentor continuously. We have to provide continuous professional development opportunities for teachers, because even if teachers have good content knowledge, if, as Yasai mentioned, if they do not have the right pedagogical skills, they would not be able to teach. And I remember from my experience when I taught, there were a number of times where I would think my lesson plan would work, but it actually was not able to work, and I had to go back online and read up how to best deliver this concept. And in that part, teachers do need help. And that help can come through pre-service training, through in-service training, and also through a system where they interact with each other to share their knowledge. So in my school, there were good teachers too. There were teachers who would sit in a staff room and think about how I can best deliver this concept. And there would also be teachers who would not go to classroom. But there wasn't a system in place that would reward the teacher who want to perform good, and also there weren't any consequences for the teacher who was not going to class too. So we have to have a coaching, mentoring, and professional development system that provides incentives for teachers to continuously perform. So I would say, try to say that hire the best teachers, the best talent in the country, and then try to coach, mentor, and professionally develop them throughout, so that teachers can become the school leaders. And then the academic champions, they should be the content leaders. They should develop onto pedagogical leaders, onto school management leaders, and even higher positions in the public education sector. That should be some possible career trajectories that they should have when they join. And for recruiting best talent, Teach for Pakistan used to go out to all the best universities to be able to get the best talent that was available. Currently, the public education system does not work that way. But we have to adopt those approaches to try to get the best human resources we have in the country, because I come from a family of teachers at all levels. My dad used to be a professor in our government college, and a number of my family members have worked in schools, colleges, universities. In that generation, teaching in public sector was considered a highly reputable job. In my generation, it's not. And even though from a family of teachers, when I joined Teach for Pakistan after graduating from LUMS, my family could not comprehend why I would go to a public school to teach. So reaching out to universities and reaching out to colleges to be able to get the best talent is important, and then continuous coaching and mentoring so that they can deliver. And the third point that I would want to add would be that schools and district education offices need to be given more autonomy, more operational and financial autonomy, so that, because they are teachers in schools, the principals and the non-teaching staff, those are the people who daily interact with students. They know the needs of the community, they know the needs of the parents, and the district education offices, they know the context better and have experience in that region for a considerable amount of time. So they would be the best people to identify the challenges in their community and be able to plan accordingly. So from my side, I would say that these three things, recruit best talent, coach, mentor, and professionally develop them, and ensure that there is operational and financial autonomy at the school and the district education office level, and they are also held accountable for results. So the point that Rasab mentioned about assessments is very important, so that we can track results too and make schools and district offices accountable, but we can only make them accountable if they are autonomous to make any decisions too. If they are not if they do not have any development budgets, they won't be able to make any changes. And currently, they do not get much development budgets, only teacher salaries. So we cannot expect them to deliver results too. So that would be, and EMIS we have been doing for a number of years now. So for infrastructure indicators, we have been able to track. And there are Punjab Education Commission, and Sindh is also doing a standardized assessment test. There's a Balochistan Examination Commission too. So we have established examination commissions too. Now we have to make sure that those produce valid results that can be used for accountability. So from my side, I would say these 3 points. However, any teacher reform is very politically controversial and difficult to do. However, learning outcomes where they have improved in Latin American countries, in Peru, Brazil, Chile, where they have improved significantly on their PISA scores, that has been possible by doing these difficult teacher reforms. And that have taken years to be able to do. In Colombia, the reform was introduced in 2002, and now they have been able to get their 54% of their teaching force into the new policy for teachers. So it will take time, but I think that is the place where civil society organizations can help a lot to put pressure on government to deliver and hold them accountable. And not only, so now education has devolved to provincial level, and if it gets devolve to more district level, hold even the district officials responsible for the results. Earlier, Imran Khan used Elan's and Pildet's result to promote for his education, to highlight his education successes in KP. So civil society organizations can help there a lot. And they can also help a lot to test out models that, and then partner with governments to be able to scale those. Models for effective teacher recruitment policies, models for coaching and mentoring practices, models for how to have good academic leaders as principals. So I think that is somewhere where civil society organizations can help a lot.
Thank you very much. Arup, I'm going to try and lump my questions into maybe just one or two short ones, just to open up the discussion. And please think about the questions you want to ask. I already have one question ready. So we'll open it up to you. One of the issues, obviously, is resource. In Pakistan, that always is an issue. How do you apportion resources for a country where much of the budget is spent on defense or on debt servicing? And so I was struck by the numbers of how much it costs to educate a child per month using the TCF model, roughly $7 a month. Although we'd also heard that if you donate $120, that educates a child for a year. So compare that with a government school where it could be $30 to $50 a month. So you're now talking multiples. The question is, how do you translate that difference by using organizations like TCF and CARE or other DIL or other institutions that are trying to educate people in Pakistan to act as a multiplier? Is it possible to kickstart the process so that you can leapfrog the gap that has been created between semi-private or private education and the public education? So whoever wants to go first.
So I would actually want Nadia to take on the issue of whether we have enough money in the system or not, but very, very quickly in terms of efficiency itself, the TCF model costs about $10 per child per month, and 67% of that goes to teacher compensation, teacher training, and teacher transportation. Like any enterprise, we manage that number every day. And when you have very large expense bases, any manager of an enterprise would also tell you that's a huge opportunity. Sometimes when you're running a large company and you don't have investment dollars, the real resource is your expense base itself on how you can optimize the existing running expense. And I think one way of really looking at solutions to the problem is looking at the current expense base and looking at it over a 50-year horizon and seeing how we can remodel the way current money in the system is used, rather than just pushing for greater allocations are always going to be helpful, but there is enough money not to just leave us in a state of inaction. I think Nadia can inform that as well.
Just on the budget piece, you guys, some of you might have heard this or seen what I've written before, but when it comes to the military, the budget numbers that have been cited for education in Pakistan have only been the federal government numbers, but the bulk of spending is at the provinces. So actually today, education budgets have doubled, say between 2010 and 2015. They increased at about 18% per year. According to the World Bank, they were increasing at 18% per year in the decade before that. So this has consistently been increasing. The amount that Pakistan spends on education actually rivals the defense budget. And this, when you count the provincial spending, which is where the spending is, you get a number around, and I'm using old exchange rates when I did this work, around $8 billion. Military is just a little bit, like 8 point something above that. And there are as many teachers in Pakistan as there are people in the military. Your problem is that most of the money is spent on teacher salaries, which are above market salaries, consistent raises despite lack of performance. And this budget basically isn't performing for Pakistan. You have to make the teachers productive in order for budget to work. Donors put in about 2%. USAID or DFID, with their largest programs in the world, equal about 2% of what Pakistan spends. I think until... and the reason why that money is so attractive and actually defines the agenda. So even though Pakistan has the bulk of resources, it's the international community that defines the agenda and drives the narratives around which Pakistanis act. And this is happening, I guess, because, it's a strange paradoxical situation, but the budget that donors bring is the only flexible money in the system, because most of it is being tied up in salaries for what are essentially or have been historically political workers. There's a lot more to be said on that, but I won't say it on the budget numbers.
Thank you. I think you made some very critical distinctions and explanations. A lot of people don't understand that the central government really doesn't control education, as it doesn't control a lot of development projects either. They're all now at the provincial level, so those numbers have to be taken into account. I just had a quick question about language. Mainly because we had an example from Canada that was cited. What about the European countries, the Scandinavian countries, and others? How is it that they can teach in their own languages and their students are fluent in English and French or some other German in some cases? Is that a model that can be applied to Pakistan? Where, as you say, rightly, the provincial languages have very powerful separate dialects. I come from the Potawar, and if you were to speak Lahori Punjabi with somebody in the village in Potawar, he or she would have difficulty translating that into the language that the child hears. So how do you approach that so that you have proficiency in an international or a national language like English or Urdu, but you're learning through your local language?
So this is nothing unique. This has happened in many places around the world. And the core bit is that there has to be a method to the madness. There has to be a research-based language ladder being structured on which you say there is, in terms of using those terms, L1, L2, and L3, the first, the second, the third language. So really from a research-based perspective, understanding when to do the transitions and how. Just a couple of examples of that. Research says that when you are introducing a second language, that must come in after about 18 to 24 months following the introduction of L1. So that gives you a kind of an anchor to say when L2 comes into play. Another bit of research which suggests that for any language to become a medium of instruction for science and maths, the child should have at least 6 years of exposure to that. So if we take that as a rule of thumb, it means English, if math is to be taught in English, the child should have had 6 years of English as a language instruction, which means if starting at grade 1, maths cannot be taught in English before grade 7. So it's not something that is unique. It's been done in multiple parts of the world. It's really about serious-mindedly with a sense of purpose, thinking about it and structuring a ladder through which those kind of outcomes can be achieved.
I just want to add very briefly that this just doesn't have to do with academic outcomes and learning and literacy. It has to do with much deeper and broader questions of identity, social contract, what do we see each other as, and even in the most expensive private schools in Pakistan, we don't teach our own children Urdu literature. We teach them Urdu B. And I have seen examples in my own household when literature, for instance, is explained and the complexity and nuance of thought and human creation is explained in the local language, there is an actual aha moment. I never realized that such complexity is communicated in Urdu. So it goes deep into how we see ourselves and our fellows, and therefore in terms of confidence and critical thinking, which is really formed in the very, very early years, even if you make the child feel at home or comfortable and confident in the academic environment, that propels him and her throughout their academic journey.
If you say Punjabi or Pashto or Saraiki in Pakistan, people will look like they want to eat you alive, because this is English is primary above education. But the point is that when you start with mother tongue and you start with these languages, that enables real English acquisition to occur later on. You have to know one language in order to build language skills in another. And that's what, so this is mother tongue based multilingual. Pakistan needs multilingualism as well.
Thank you for
also-
explaining that, Nadia. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I would also like to add like a little point. It is very well established in research that education, at least in the early years, should be done in the mother tongue and then transition gradually on to a second language if needed. And most of the African countries have already taken that up. So it is interesting to see why Pakistan, though this literature has been established for 12 or so years now, has not taken that up. So one hypothesis is also that perhaps we do planning at a very central level where we do not take any inputs from the person who is teaching, from the person who is the school leader. So we made these decisions, and then teachers have to just follow those decisions. And that is also one of the reasons why they can get demotivated from performing too if their contribution is not taken into account in any of the policy decisions that are taken on curriculum, on language of instruction, on designing lesson plans, etc.
Thank you. I think that's also a very critical point, and that affects not just the education sector, but almost every other sector in the economy and polity of Pakistan. So something to think about. Just to confuse everyone about language in particular, I came from a Punjabi mother tongue household, but Punjabi is never taught in the primary or middle or even high school. You can do a master's in Punjabi, but you have to learn how to read and write it on your own. And I learned to actually read literary Punjabi and Punjabi poetry or Potwari poetry when I was in college, because I had a mentor named Munnu Bhai, a name that some of you may recognize from Pakistan. But the issue that we face with language is that it's a political issue. I think that's what Nadia was hinting at. In the end, it becomes a political issue. You know, which language, which accent, which dialect. But I'm glad that this was raised, and I'm glad that we have people with experience talking about it. Let me go to the audience. Please introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Jemina Siddiqui, U.S. Institute of Peace. Thank you all. We've worked with TCF before to do a Peace Libraries program for kindergarten through second grade, and with some very interesting findings, so we've appreciated that work. One issue that has not been raised is the for-profit, low-fee private schools. And the reason I raised this is because I sent my daughter to one for a month this summer. And then I also spent a half a day at the TCF lab school with her. And the fact that she had so much more fun and actually learned and interacted with students there more at the lab school than going to this English medium school where she was correcting the teacher's work in the KG class blows my mind, because for us, $200 a month was nothing. I was paying $300 a week for her daycare and her private school here. So spending $200 for a month to send her to school and keep her busy and out of the house, fine by me. I didn't plan well for the summer. Yeah. So I was, because I didn't, yeah, so that if you can comment on how you're working with or not working with, or the government's working with these for-profit, low-fee private schools, because it was just, I finally had to go to the teacher and say, can you please give her something else? So finally she was doing what they're, teaching in second grade. And my daughter's in kindergarten in the U.S. this year. So...
These, what you've described it so well, this is the kind of destination, what you saw in that, well, good private school, actually, because even the low-fee ones, which are worse than what you described, are considered to be 1.5 to 2.5 grades ahead of government schools. And just by using this comparative metric, not an absolute of how bad they may be, has driven this kind of, let's partner with the private sector and make government schools even better, as wonderful as these low-fee private schools. But in the end, you can see how bad they really are. So there's a lot of work to be done there as well. Sorry, Riaz. Okay.
So there are 100,000 private schools, and a tiny fraction of them are at the $100, $150, $200 price point. Most of them are $3 or $4 price points per month. And really what we cannot do is ignore that, like, the government stopped making schools 10 or 12 years ago. In some respects, that's a good decision because they didn't want to replicate their existing kind of model. But at second, that's just an admission of absolute retreat. And it is good that at least something from the private sector occupied that space. We at TCF have made it a pillar of our strategy to intervene in that space. A few years ago, we did something called TCF in a Box, where we took our books, our training, and our management model and our assessment sort of metrics to some private schools. This was a pilot. And what we found is, while they're all good and well received, soon we lose leverage, because even though we are offering something of value, the private sector entrepreneur, who's the principal of the school, sees this with suspicious eyes. Why should my kids and teachers be assessed? And he or she would step back from that intervention. So the jury is still out on what we would use as leverage, so to speak, a broad, blunt word, but how would we make that intervention really stick? But in the meantime, what we're creating is our two large social enterprises. One is a publishing house, where we will take the books we have developed and the books we intend to develop and the reading resources we intend to develop to these private schools. Today, there are about 175 to 200 private schools that are using our books. They are in Urdu, and they're showing stellar results. The second thing we want to do is we are running every year a massive teacher training effort and a teaching community of practice. It's on WhatsApp, it's on Facebook. Teachers solve each other's problems. When they have a competence issue, they can reach out and seek a resource which would address that specific issue. So we are in 800 communities all over Pakistan. So what we want to do is create a very large teacher-led training effort which would enable them to go up the ladder of content and pedagogical kind of competence, and make a life and a career out of teaching as well, but as a community, and by becoming better teachers. And soon we feel that there is enough critical mass here that we can develop to turn many of these low-cost private schools, because they do compete, and parents don't have surrogates for quality. So maybe great teachers with certificates can become surrogates for quality rather than English medium, or I have a computer there. Or
myself. Yeah, my name is Ramiza, and I'm running an organization with the name of Transparent Hands. So it is working in the health sector, but before that I worked in the education sector for 15 years, and I've done my MPhil in applied linguistics. So I have actually taught in a number of different systems, like in the army schools, city school, Beacon House system, and then at the university level also. So, and then when I moved here, and my kids, when they started studying here, and now I am also like teaching English as a second language here, as a part-time. So what I realized here, the difference between the teachers here and over there, the main difference is that we do not emphasize on reading. That's the first thing. The teachers do not read. They do not do the research over there. And that is the thing which they inculcate in the students also. So here, the most important thing is they make the students read from the very beginning. They start giving them books, even if the students are not ready to read. even if they're not interested, they start reading, and automatically this is how they start learning things. This is the exposure. So the teachers do not have exposure over there. And the other thing is, unfortunately, the teachers, the ones who come to this profession, they are the ones who do not get jobs anywhere else, or probably there are very few who are very passionate about teaching and they teach at a higher level. But normally the ones who do not get jobs anywhere and who just want to pass their time, they just join the schools. So there should be proper teaching centers or the certified centers which the teacher has to qualify before entering into this profession. Like here, there are certified courses. They are of at a level. There are in Pakistan, there is a B.Ed, M.Ed, which the teachers have to do, but they are of no use. I mean, they do not provide that quality. I have been through all that, so I can clearly see. I think if we work on these things, on the teacher trainings, as everyone said, but like in which way we need to train the teacher? We need to have proper mentors, the ones who have all the exposure, who have done all the researches, the ones who know that what is going on in the different countries in the world, what are the latest pedagogical teaching methods. So we need those kind of mentors, and then we would be able to create good teachers, we would be able to create good students. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll treat that as a comment more than a question, but Shamaila, you had...
Thank you. Shamaila Chaudhry, I'm the president of the American Pakistan Foundation. Is it on? Okay. So I was struck by Zia Saab's comment that language is about who you are, and that is that has universal application. And in the context of Pakistan, I'm thinking of the clip that Nadia showed of speaking to the little boy who couldn't understand or reply to you fully in Urdu, and he spoke Pashto very comfortably. Why can't you speak Pashto to him, right? And I'm talking about this from growing up in a Punjabi family, Punjabi-speaking parents who speak English better than Urdu. Is there an effort to take this mother-based tongue and make it kind of something that you use to encourage Pakistanis to communicate with each other in different mother tongues? So, for example, before you get to English, are you going to be teaching Punjabis to read and speak Sindhi? And I say this because I'm always struck when I go to Pakistan that how many people don't know how to communicate with each other. And so effectively what we do is this system that we've created has created parallel universes of privilege and access and opportunity. So I would just like your comment on that. And I know that's probably a bit beyond what your focus is, but before you get to English as the third or fourth language, I feel like you might need to focus on the relationships between the provincial languages.
I mean, I hear you. I mean, we learn Spanish in this country, right? Like, we learn all sorts of languages because that's what America is. But Pakistan is just so far from it. I mean, it's so hard to convince the Sindhi speaker, the Punjabi, parent that the child needs to learn Punjabi first or Sindhi first. I mean, the biggest challenge with Pashto is we can demonstrate it through research, but no one's taught to read and write Pashto, like these methods. So it's just, I think it's just, you're totally right, but it's the battle, and that, it's insane. Like, I think if you've grown up here to realize what's obvious to us here and what's obvious there is just two completely different things.
And just a two-finger list, migration has also made this issue. So people from
Yeah.
Fatah, from our tribal areas, KP, that have their parents, this is my own in-laws. My husband and none of his siblings speak Pashto, but they're from Ahmedabad, because when they left, and they were all born there, for fear of being singled out as a Pathan, they did not learn Pashto. Their parents didn't teach them Pashto. Yeah. So when you come to urban centers like Karachi and Lahore and even in Islamabad, kids are not, or I think kids will probably be afraid of speaking in their mother tongue.
But to not speak Urdu well and to speak in English is a status thing, right?
Exactly, that's another thing.
So even Urdu is disposable.
Yes.
I mean, Sindhi, Pashto, there's not even on the table.
Yeah.
I think I would only add to that language and identity are fundamentally linked. The language in which you dream, in which you have joy and fear and all of those things. It's a fundamental part of what the human soul is like. Now, these are serious issues on which serious-minded work with a sense of purpose needs to be done. And I think that serious-mindedness and a sense of purpose are conspicuous by absence. And that's where the narrative needs to be redirected to say that these are very real issues. These are not things which can be fixed in one political term. These are agenda or really crucial issues for national identity which needs to have the right steer, the right sense of purpose for a decade or two. And education has a significant contributing piece to it, but there are other elements of society which need to come along. But for that, clarity on what does that ideal look like? What is our North Star? That's missing. And we believe some of the folks in this room and around who work with governments can help cultivate that there's seriousness required around this.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take two last questions, and I know that you've been waiting, so if you can identify yourself, and then after you, we'll have the young lady over here. Who else?
Yes.
Okay, we'll make it three. We'll take all three, and then we'll answer them together.
Awaz's
Thank you.
work is some of the work I respect the most. He's working on Bushville University and doing his PhD.
Yeah. So thank you guys for the wonderful panel that you guys had, and I really appreciate the work that TCF does. But I'm very curious to ask you guys, what do you think is TCF's role in the ecosystem of education in Pakistan? Are you trying to bring in a good organizational standards, or are you trying to stimulate good research work for people to inform the work that you're doing? So I just want to hear from you guys, like, what are you doing? Because it's very, very important. I chose to study economics as the discipline of choice, and you see the kind of economics research that is taken seriously these days. They study the causal impact of adding a teacher in a classroom, and that kind of research does not help anyone at all. So if we can work towards an equilibrium where an organization such as TCF can identify, these are the priority areas that are identified in our work, where as you mentioned in the presentation, where people need to work on, then maybe the kind of work that we get in the entire ecosystem might be more geared towards creating a success for the students. So first tell me, like, who do you think you are?
Thank you. I'll ask you. I'm going to ask you to hold off on the reply. Sure. Let's get the other two questions in.
Oh, no. So I'll keep my question short. So just briefly. Sure. My name is Myra Khan. I'm currently with the World Bank in the education global practice. I've been there for 5 years. Before that, I was working with Aroob at Teach for Pakistan. And I'm sure most of you know Teach for Pakistan. But what we try to do is take the best quality graduates from top universities in Pakistan and place them in very, very harsh government schools, unfortunately for them. And also we have placed some in TCF schools as well. So we have a good relationship with that. I think my main question always comes back to teachers, as everybody keeps pointing out, because even if we talk about issues of identity and multilingual, teachers get, the brunt of all of that. Like, what language should they be teaching in? Teachers often don't even know what language and how to be teaching in a classroom which has multiple languages spoken in it. The reason Teach for Pakistan sort of came into being, into existence, is because there was this fundamental and critical gap in the human resource of the entire teaching profession in Pakistan. And I'm sure that's one of the major issues today as well. The teacher education colleges have, unfortunately, quite poor status. Even if there is certification, it's sort of like the higher education system in Pakistan is something that's a completely separate issue, but even those with the right qualifications don't necessarily have all the skills, the attitudes, and the motivation needed to teach in those schools where kids are already years and years behind their grade levels. And I can speak about this a lot, but I wanted to ask about TCF's workforce and TCF's hiring, what they look for in teachers, and how they motivate and develop teachers, because one of the things that Teach for Pakistan does, even though they're just 2 years spending in government schools, they have continuous support, even though I'm sure we all wish it could be more, and the lesson plans could have been designed better, and the workshops could have been better as well. One thing that we really focus on and understand is that teaching is a profession just like any other profession. If you're not being motivated, if you're not given any opportunities to grow, you're not going to want to perform your best. So I'd love to hear about TCF's approach to that as well.
Thank you. Last question, and then we'll get all the answers.
So I had one comment and one question, and my question was the same that Myra has asked. And my comment is about sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Shahzad. I'm doing PhD in education policy in University of Maryland on Fulbright scholarship. So my comment is about low-fee private schools. I have been visited in public schools a lot in Punjab. So there are many parents who can't even afford like 15 cents per month for their children. And even if low-fee private schools charge very low, but there are still like many people who won't afford them. And about their quality, there are many research. If we control out-of-school factors, they are not good schools in any sense as compared to public sector. So we need to push for public sector. And if government take that stance that stop building the schools, that's not the solution. So we should push government to take responsibility with which constitution asks for them. Thank you.
I think all the questions are about TCF.
I'm sorry. So I'm going to take that one, and I'll ask Riaz to talk about teachers as well. It's not just $1 million question, it's like $100 billion question for us every day, every night. Because if you ask us hand on heart, if you leave us to ourselves, we'll sit in a room, and if Riaz would like nothing better than to figure out in those 1250 TCF administered schools and 310 adopted schools, what can I do to make the classroom experience better and learning outcomes better. And we are a school operator, we are managers, that's our DNA. But when we are in other rooms, we are confronted with this harsh reality of this crisis, and we are Pakistanis, and we cannot look away. So we have a role to play. Last year we made a strategy which confirmed that we have a role to play, which went beyond TCF schools into other areas of formal schooling and into areas where formal schooling cannot solve for. For instance, for the 77% of the 22.6 billion out-of-school kids are above the age of 10. They've never been to school. They're probably working somewhere. You cannot envisage them being in kindergarten with 5-year-olds. What is the solution for those kids? And we cannot accept that there is no solution. They're a lost generation. So we are designing a program of literacy and life skills and possibly a ladder to skill development one day, which provides them a credible path and some aspiration in life. And even our work with low-cost private schools is meant not to just fight the ideological battle of whether they exist or not, but because they exist at a poor quality, we need to intervene in some way to raise them from a 2 to a 4 or a 5. So we are that. We are not a research-based organization, but we are now strangely find ourselves with a seat at the table. And for once, the seat is for Pakistani citizens and organizations, not just donors. So we welcome that. But we are having to pivot really quickly in terms of basing what we say not just in our visceral experience of classrooms, but on more than that. And there is a role for learning in action in classrooms, and there is a role for learning from researchers. And we are literally building that capability under Riaz as we speak. In the next few years, much of what we were, talking to other practitioners in the US about was about recasting TCF's sort of North Star. What is it what is the impact we want to really create, and how big can that impact be? On teachers, I just want to say, I want to invite Riaz not just to talk about teacher training, but the morale and the whole aspect of how we get them to perform in the system.
So on teachers, I'd comment both from a TCF perspective as well as generally. And two main points essentially. Teachers must be held to a minimum standard. And once they comply or they fulfill the minimum standard, it is important how you view them. So touching base on both of these points, what do I mean by minimum standards? A teacher should turn up, shouldn't beat up the child, should actually endeavor to teach, should have reasonable command on her content knowledge. So these are some very basic table stakes. And those are not always fulfilled in a number of schools. So our view is you should not compromise on these minimum standards, and that's where compliance is required. But once you have that, it's crucial on how you view the teacher. If you view the teacher as a commoditized entity who is there simply to flip burgers, so to speak, come round and teach every day, and it's a commoditized agent, you can replace X with Y, and you need to simply discipline and penalize through punitive methods to ensure that that teacher does the job, you will get that person. It is how you view the person, you get that person. So our view is that once a teacher complies with minimum standards, it is important that view that person as somebody who's keen to teach, who actually has a passion for children, who wants to develop herself. And once you take that worldview, as naive as it may sound on the fringes, but what you do find, surprise, is that about 8 out of 10 people will see themselves in that same mold. If you do bring that mentorship, bring that motivation to the piece, bring recognition for work well done, teachers will, by virtue of their core work, which is working with young children, develop an intrinsic motivation for it. So to us, that's the direction. And that's the direction we've followed at TCF by being very clear on what those minimum standards are and being very strong in recognizing teachers when they do their jobs well. And that's the learning that we are taking to governments as well. So, for example, in my conversations with the Punjab government, as part of some of those committees, the conversation has been one where move away from punitive measures. One of the key things as a motive in Punjab has been if your children don't do well in the examination commission results, you will get a show cause notice. And you'll have to come and explain why they didn't get the results. And then one kind of struggles to understand why there's cheating in the examinations. Of course there will be cheating in the examinations. So it's to change the lens on how the teacher is viewed, and that's something that the Punjab government is now at least actively working to change that lens. How much success they achieve is another question.
I just want to add a few things as examples. We found that teachers who may have entered our system with a lower level of qualification but have stayed with us for a few years actually become better in terms of their competence, even in terms of their teaching content knowledge, even compared to those which entered with better qualifications. So really you can make great teachers of willing individuals. In a TCF system today, every teacher is tested, and then they are given not only the results but the weak areas for their subjects, and they're given a book where there are codes for videos and other resources that they can watch and improve themselves on those areas. So I can SMS or WhatsApp 7837, for instance, to a central resource center, which will send me links to those videos on my phone. And if not, I can always go to the AV room in my school and develop my own learning on my own time, apart from the 120 hours of classroom training that we'll provide that teacher. So it's not an accident, it can be very deliberately done.
Quick, because I know we're running out of time. School leadership is really important at TCF because school leaders are the day-to-day support for teachers. So they are the academic leader for the school, the behavioral leader. So I think TCF has really rested on the kind of 900 principals in strong principals who are then providing support on a day-to-day basis to 12,000 teachers. But now even above the principal is a strong field education manager who's a woman. and that's been kind of switched, and who has really strong education management credentials. So there are tiers of support in the system, more than next to a lot of the other models they've mentioned.
To add something to wrap things up?
I would definitely like to add that. Thank you. Yeah, I would just like to add that that teachers are the ones who deliver education. So we have to make sure that we invest on teachers in all this throughout the process, and be able to support them in delivering the best quality education. And yeah, I would just like to emphasize that the decision making at higher level should also incorporate feedback from teachers and principals to be able to get more effective.
Thank you. I know that we could probably go on for another hour, but the District of Columbia will probably tow away my car in the meantime. They're very good at raising funds through that method. And I think we ended on the right note. Clearly, from what I'm hearing, teachers are very critical. The taxonomy of teaching, the taxonomy of addressing the problems that TCF has identified is also critical. It was fascinating to hear from Nadia that the resource constraint that everyone talks about is more an intellectual constraint, that you can actually get a bigger bang for your education dollars, depending on how you use them. And then a point that Arup was making, I think a number of times, and you made also, which is that if you get feedback from within the system and have a bottom-up approach instead of the traditional top-down approach where people sitting in Islamabad decide what is going to happen, even when the work is being done at the provincial level. I think that will take some time, because the Babus are very reluctant to give up their power, whether it's Islamabad or Washington or Delhi or wherever. This is endemic. They have the power and they want to use the power of the purse. I want to thank my teacher, particularly the one who, in my senior Cambridge class, which was the overseas school certificate class, said, "You like poetry, so you're going to do Jawahir Pare." So I took advanced Urdu. I was one of 2 students who took advanced Urdu, and I can never thank Mr. Qureshi enough for having put me on that path, because otherwise I would have been Urdu B. And I would have had the same problem in reading or writing Urdu that the majority of people in the so-called English medium schools have in Pakistan. That was just a personal note. Thank you very much to the South Asia team for having put together this program, and to Nadia for having brought the TCF team and others and the concept to the Atlantic Council. I'm sure we have people out there listening. They found it as useful as I did. And I want to thank the audience in particular. You've been very attentive and patient and have gone way beyond the 1 hour that we had devoted to this. Maybe feedback for our colleagues at the South Asia Center, in future 90 minutes might be the right minimum amount. Thank you all, and please join me in thanking all of you.